Well, hello everybody, and welcome to yet another edition of CrossWorlds, the show where we talk very loosely about the future of the Metaverse and virtual worlds. First of all, I would like to apologise for those of you expecting this show to appear last week. There are a few technical glitches, and in fact, we've put the whole series back a week. Also, fortunately, to avoid Thanksgiving Day in America next week. So we've got today, and then we'll be back in a fortnight. My guest today is actually somebody I know very well. I'm a bit biased, really. She's my sort of virtual landlady in many respects, but she is an educator and has also a reputation for developing in-world communities, both in Second Life originally, in earlier spaces too, in fact, then on Reaction Grid, and more lately on her own grid, which is known as FleepGrid. And her name, or at least her name in world, is Fleep Tuque. She's also known as Chris Collins in real life, but we'll call her Fleep, I think. So welcome to the show, Fleep.
Hi, Mel. Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
And great to have you here too. The thing I like to do at the beginning of these shows actually is just hand it over to you to give your pitch, really, sort of give a little bit of history, say who you are, what you're doing, and particularly with emphasis in sort of the hypergrid and the open sims and future, but a little bit of history too. So maybe you'd like to do that.
Sure. Well, I guess, for background reference, I started in Second Life initially in the beta and then really came in 2005. And, I spent the next 4 or 5 years heavily immersed in Second Life, both for community purposes in the Chilbo community, which I think is probably how I met you. I'm not exactly sure how you and I met, come to think of it. It's been so long.
I think it was, well, it's either Chilbo or Tara, or it might even have been Metanomics and Nick Wilson in Metaverse. These things, I forget too, to be honest.
Yeah, it might actually be Metanomics, but and also working with my professional work at the University of Cincinnati in Second Life, and it's just been in the last year or so that I've really become much more involved with OpenSim and exploring how OpenSim and the broader metaverse is coming together in really interesting ways. So, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about some of those things a little later on the show, but generally speaking, my basic interest in both Second Life and OpenSim, I think many of us really believe that this metaverse concept is it's already coming together. But I'm interested in sort of the community aspects and the political and economic aspects of how these virtual worlds impact our real lives and how we can use them to improve the real world, not just our virtual worlds. So hopefully that's a good sort of overall introduction.
Yes, it is indeed. Well, Chilbo, I'd like to just cover a little bit of Chilbo. I know we have some footage running of Chilbo as well. Chilbo in Second Life was, well, I suppose in all its incarnations, but particularly in Second Life, was a very organic affair, wasn't it? I mean, you and a partner at the time sort of started it up, and then a lot of people involved, and it's been very much a sort of user-created environment within the Second Life environment, and it's more of an ideal, isn't it, than a sort of physical place.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think unlike what makes Chilbo, I think, different from many of the communities in Second Life, was that we were not so much about a particular interest, like there are, role-playing communities or communities that are involved in a particular, like the sailing community, obviously they're all about sailing. With Chilbo, it was very, very different. We sort of started just as meeting people who had bought first land in the southern continent when it was brand new. So it was sort of a vast open land with lots of tiny 5-12 meter plots. And we just, I bumped into a couple of people who had, picked up some of those first land plots, and we thought, let's try to, make this space nice. And the community grew very organically that way. Instead of going out and recruiting people to join, it was more like as people came in, we wanted to meet our neighbors, and we started adding sidewalks and just getting to know each other. So in that sense, I think Chilbo is very diverse. We have folks from lots of different, in terms of Second Life subcultures, we have a little bit of everything. We have educators, we have furries, we have role players, we have, you name it, artists, creators, builders, scripters. And I think that's what's made Chilbo, a really fun place to live in Second Life, because instead of, all one thing all the time, we're a nice mix of a little bit of everything on the grid, I think.
Yeah, and it has that wonderful sort of small town feel as well, and nice open space. And actually, I always recognise the Chilbo, whether it's on your grid, Second Life, or Reaction Grid, because of the wonderful pavement or sidewalks, as I think you got in America, because it's always the same. Wherever that pavement is, we know there's a Chilbo connection, even if it's wandering way off site, so to speak. Now it's very funny in talking about open sims and the greater metaverse on this program. We always come back to the kind of people who are migrating from big public platforms like Second Life to the open sims, for example. It certainly makes sense for educators, for example, where you, and maybe, we'll come back to Chilbo on this, maybe communities where you have a captive audience and it is just more economical to move to the open sim infrastructure, and you can then, of course, take your captive audience with you. I think we know from Chilbo that that doesn't always happen, possibly because the open sims don't yet compete as that great wonderful public vista.
I think that's definitely true. I have to admit, I was a little surprised at the hesitance of Chilbo residents to sort of step outside of Second Life. And, I think individually people, I think you and a couple of other folks, you and I, our interest, I think it caused people to at least try it and log in. But I think the majority of users in our community were really focused on some of the more social aspects and some of the content, enjoying being able to go out and buy ready-made outfits instead of wanting to make everything themselves. And so I was a little surprised that there wasn't more interest in sort of crossover. But I think in some ways I can really contrast that with the educational community, who have really embraced OpenSim very, broadly, I think. And in part, I think it has a lot to do, obviously there's the economic factors, the cost of operating regions in Second Life when you're, not doing it for personal reasons, but for like a campus or something. Second Life costs can be prohibitive. But I also think that educators tend to have a bootstrappy kind of attitude. They like to get in, they like to learn things and be challenged. And while it's daunting to start on a little fresh island with, not even the clothes on your back, in some ways that's also a challenge and a palette to be creative. And at least for me, and I know many of the other educators I've spoken with, it gives us sort of the feeling that we had when Second Life was new, that excitement of, wow, here is a new world and I get to make it from scratch. And that's sort of, I don't feel that way in Second Life anymore. I mean, we're still creating and collaborating, but it's not that fresh, blank slate that it was in 2003 or 2005.
It's funny. We often hear the sort of story about how dead and lifeless Second Life is now, but I actually think in many ways it's the opposite. It's actually too big. That any sense of community and pioneering that was there is now drowned out by the sheer volume of things you can do. And sometimes you feel, you don't know where to turn and what to do, as it were, because actually there is too much to choose from. One of the reasons Lindens aren't so prominent in their own community now is that, they can't log in and get any work done. If let people know they're there. So it's often possible to actually imagine that with the hypergrid and the interconnection of open simulator installations, we can have the Franco grids of the world and the reaction grids all connected up, and a lot of them will actually be specializing in ways that communities in Second Life used to specialize within Second Life. In this case, it's communities specializing on their own grid. But if you imagine them all connected up at some point in the future, you probably have a massive population that at some point is going to come close to the in total, all added together, to the sort of public population we're used to in Second Life. Do you think how far down the line do you think that could be?
Well, I think we're closer to it all the time for sure. When I first started really paying attention to OpenSim, it was still, extremely niche. But, I'm encouraged by the number of people who are participating in the listservs and content creation and all sorts of things. I think we're a little ways off yet still, though. And I don't really... I think that there are a couple of factors that influence that. I mean, in some ways, Second Life and virtual worlds, as opposed to game platforms, is still niche. And I know that there's been much written about that, on the blogosphere and what have you. So in some ways, Second Life itself is a niche, and OpenSim then is a niche of a niche. Mm-hmm. But, and one of the other factors, I think, is actually the viewer development for OpenSim is not quite as active as the server development of OpenSim. But I think once those kinds of technical glitches get ironed out, it's fantastic to have the ability to really create your own world. And I think that while the population in OpenSim is still obviously smaller than in Second Life, every day, there's some percentage of users who begin exploring it. And, I don't feel like it has to be an either-or proposition. The skills that we've learned in Second Life, the lessons that we've learned, for example, everything that I've learned about community building in Second Life is directly transferable to OpenSim. All of the content creation skills that I've learned transfer right over to OpenSim. And so I think as people discover that they don't have to, especially with the hypergrid, once they realize that they don't have to create a new avatar on every service,
yes,
that you can, my avatar, Fleep Tuque, she's dressed, she's ready to go, she has her inventory, and she can hop around. I don't have to create 50 new accounts. When I have something that I want to share with, my friends on New World Grid, I can just bring it right over and leave them a copy or whatever. And that, in that sense, it becomes a really expansive metaverse, and there's lots to do and lots to see, and that's only going to increase with time, I think.
I think the point you raised about the viewer, I've mentioned this with several of our guests, and one thing that always gets me is the fact that we're seeing a lot of third-party viewers, most of which are just more alternative viewers for Second Life, whereas we keep going into OpenSims in viewers that are actually Second Life-centric. You copy a slurl to the clipboard and it doesn't work because it's a slurl, which means Second Life. We almost need a communication system that works between worlds. In other words, I should have been able to, I can use Twitter, but I wasn't able to contact anybody outside of Second Life via group messaging. In other words, I wasn't able to send a message to Action Grid specifically or to people on other grids. I think it's possible at some point that Linda Labs will either have to allow hypergridding in or some method of hypergridding out, but it will be when, there's this volume, where they can't really ignore it. And when we've been discussing commerce and business on this program, which is really a bit off center here now, the thing that always came across is you need to exactly know what your intention is when you're using a platform. For example, a lot of business came into Second Life. It's like building their early web pages. They didn't really know what they were doing. But Second Life, being a public space, is a great showroom. If you have a business or some kind of enterprise, even education, if you need a showroom like a shop on a high street, Second Life is that high street, and it's a great place to have it. But you don't put your research lab or your back office in the shop. They're removed, and this seems to be where OpenSIMs are coming into play a lot. Now, one of the great things about having you on this show is that we haven't actually had anybody, believe it or not, in the entire series yet who is actually using OpenSIM as their own installation. Like many people have space on hosted OpenSIMs and things like that. But what you have done is you're actually running the OpenSIM code on your own machine as a server, and you can have it online or offline. I notice now you're online most of the while, but effectively, it's almost fair to say that you have the virtual world as your desktop now, and you leap from your desktop, your own machine, your own space, and simply connect to the hypergrid. Now, how's that experience been? Because this is a whole different approach to OpenSIM, and I think it's one that's going to gain traction.
Well, I have to admit, I am not a programmer. I'm a geeky gal, but I'm not that geeky. And, OpenSIM was extremely daunting to me at first. Running my own server was a new concept, let alone running, software that ran in console and command line and all these things that were just way over my head. But I was really motivated because obviously I think I am a huge supporter of open source software, and the open source community really reflects my personal values. That sharing content that we create, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and while I'm perfectly happy for people to find ways to make a living off of their creativity, I love being part of a community that shares. And so I was really motivated to learn about OpenSIM. And as I started playing around with it, I discovered that, first of all, the community is much more supportive and friendly than I was maybe afraid that they would be. I wasn't geeky enough. That's what I was afraid of. Yeah. Basically what happened is I played around with the Diva distro, which if anybody is, thinking about playing with OpenSIM, Diva Canto makes a really nice distribution that's easy for newbies and people who aren't really techie to install. And it's just like, downloading and installing other software. She pre-configures everything so that it's really simple. And you can use that to run your own installation or to connect to OS Grid. So that's really where I started. And then I felt, once I got a little comfortable with that, I decided I was ready to take the plunge and try to actually run this on my own hardware. And I literally had an old P4 sitting in my basement next to the washing machine that was quite dusty and cat hairy, and I dusted it off and brought it up from the basement. It only had 2 gigs of RAM, but I thought, what the heck, it'll be a learning experience if nothing else. And that's what FleepGrid is running on. And it's been running for about a year. I did upgrade it to 4 gigs of RAM in the last year just because I got so much traffic. I get a half dozen visitors at least every day, people hypergridding in or creating accounts. And over time, as I became more comfortable and started really working on FleepGrid, I'm like doing work for my real work, using it as a personal sandbox, both for OpenSim and Second Life projects, I began to realize how powerful it was. And this is not, I really don't want to have an anti-Second Life bent, because I feel like there's a time and a place for regions in Second Life and having land in Second Life. But for someone who creates, the ability to have 10 Sims all to myself, to drag all the crap out of my inventory and be able to visually see it.
Yes.
To be able to do that for the cost of internet access instead of hundreds and hundreds of dollars in Second Life, it's just too compelling. And for me, that's really, I want to encourage anyone who's a builder in Second Life, you need to have your own OpenSim grid. You need to have your own personal sandbox. You don't have to be connected to the internet if you're worried about theft. You can
Absolutely.
Yep, you can run OpenSim with no net connection, so it's all completely local. And the tools to export your content from OpenSim to Second Life, they're still a little wonky. I won't say it's totally 100% smooth, but the benefits far, 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 far outweigh any of the downsides as far as I'm concerned. I'm saying that as somebody who professionally works in Second Life. We develop at the University of Cincinnati. We develop for customers, so I'm not talking just as a personal user. I'm talking in a professional sense. Having that space cost effectively, literally for the same amount that I was already paying for internet access, has just been wonderful.
It actually, we were talking earlier, and I still find it strange that, with the exception, there are some walled garden open sims like in Worlds that have almost taken over the mantle of Second Life, and you get small creative communities there. But it does surprise me that even clothes makers and all the creative things, even art installations that can go on in Second Life, aren't actually originated out of World and then brought in World. I mean, it is the ultimate insecurity. There's so much talk of copy bots and theft and everything else in Second Life. The obvious solution is you create it locally and then import it in Second Life. And
absolutely. And the other thing too that I should mention, it's not just about cost. For me, it has really become about controlling. How can you really own something if you can't make a good backup of it?
Well, yes.
If you can't, and that's the problem we ran into at the University of Cincinnati, and with some other projects that I've done in Second Life. You have a sim, and like at work, the grant funding runs out, and I want to make a backup of that because who knows, we might be able to get funding later or something, and it just can't be done. Whereas in OpenSim, I literally have backups of everything I create, and I've got it backed up on my PC, obviously on the FleepGrid server. I can back it up to physical media. I can back it up in the cloud. I can take it to whatever grid I want. I own that content. Those bits and bytes are totally mine. Whereas in Second Life, when you develop in Second Life, the bits and bytes are always stored on Linden Labs server. And I don't want to have an anti-Second Life bent because I don't really feel that way. But what I'm trying to say is as professional people, or even just really passionate amateurs in these virtual environments, ownership and copyright and IP, these are all really complicated things. And to me, the most secure thing, no doubt, is to have my own copy. And with OpenSim, you can do that. And with Second Life, you just can't. So to me, that's a really strong, argument. And that's one of the reasons I was motivated to explore OpenSim. And I think it's worked out, very well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me take a little diversion now, actually, and I know our camera crew have some footage of this too. The hypergrid itself. You mentioned that one of the best installations for OpenSim is Diva Canto's distribution. Of course, Diva is Krista Lopez, who actually is the creator of the hypergrid system. So if anybody knows what she's doing, it's her. And you told me, I think it was a week or two ago now, we came to a Chilbo thing over on FleepGrid, and we hypergridded out to, it's Peter Miller, I think, who's a UK educator, has this wonderful map of the hypergrid, but it's not a flat map. It sort of shows the geographic spread, but also the hierarchy of layers and the ways, in some cases, grids sort of seem to overlap, like you could walk off one and fall down onto another. And I know you said you're not techie, but I think you underestimate yourself sometimes. When you took me over there, it gave us a very good visual demonstration of just exactly how the hypergrid works. We can talk all day and not fully appreciate that. But so on the assumption Rob is actually running some video of that while we're talking now, maybe you'd like to tell us a bit about that, because I know you've been over there quite a lot, haven't you?
Yeah, I really admire Peter quite a bit. He's always coming up with really creative things, and when I first saw the hypergrid map, it's like if you've done something 100 times and suddenly it clicks in your mind that you finally can visualize what the heck you've been doing all this time. And that's kind of how it was for me. You know, hypergridding, for those who may not know, hypergridding is the process by which you can teleport your avatar from one grid to another. And due to some technical complexities with the viewers, you can only hypergrid jump so far, basically. And where a grid is located, I don't want to get too technical, but essentially you sometimes have to hop from one grid to another to reach your destination. And, you know, we've been sort of doing that with John Lester, Pathfinder Linden, or used to be Pathfinder Linden, now he's with Reaction Grid. Has the Hypergrid Adventurers Club, and we've been doing these jumps and visiting these great grids. And then I finally saw Peter's map, and it all fell into place. I've been thinking of this very two-dimensionally, but of course the metaverse is three-dimensional. And it just helped me understand how all of our grids are out there populating the metaverse, and some of them are large, and some of them, like FleepGrid, are small, but sort of helped me visualize where we all were in relation to each other. And it made you suddenly kind of feel like this metaverse concept, to be able to see it, not just experience it. I thought that was really amazing. It's on the New World grid in the Biozone region, and if you get to the Biozone region, there'll be a green, teleport arrow, and you'll just pop right up there. And Peter has nice little links, so that you can actually, make a hypergrid jump to whichever grid you want to go to. So I thought that was really a fantastic example of how we're using these spaces to explain them. You know what I'm saying? That's a little meta, but...
No, absolutely. The space itself becomes a demonstration. I remember actually just filming a... I think it was my partner Tara was filming it. It was an interview maybe 3 years ago with Krista. And I think really the hypergrid itself was fairly, it was a template at that point, it wasn't really off the ground. And she was giving this sort of talk and the filming was going fine. And then she decided to stand up and start building the hypergrid in front of us, or layers upon layers. I remember the camera was trying to chase her up vertically to see what she was doing. It was really quite...
That's really fantastic. I hope you have that footage archived somewhere, because I think that'll be, historical.
Yeah,
these days.
I think I put it on YouTube actually somewhere. So yes, it's a great little anecdote, that one.
Yeah, and the hypergrid, it's definitely still a little buggy at times, but she's already in the most recent version of OpenSim. There's some basic communication, cross-grid communication. So if you're from Malvern's grid and I'm from FleepGrid, and either of us hypergrids to each other's place and we friend each other, even when we go home, that friendship connection is made. I think we can, instant message each other. So, Krista's doing some fantastic work on the hypergrid itself. And in terms of the viewers, I wanted to mention, just to backtrack just a little bit, one of the reasons that the viewers have sort of lagged behind the OpenSim OpenSim server development was, due to concerns about intellectual property and copyright and licensing and things like that. Previously, OpenSim, people who worked on the OpenSim server could not work on Second Life viewers. But just in the last month or so, they have changed that policy. Anyone who's working on a Second Life viewer project can now contribute patches and things to OpenSim and vice versa. And I really think that this is going to have a tremendous, jumpstart effect on some of the collaborations between those who work on viewers that want to be cross-compatible with both Second Life and OpenSim. So I think some of these technical things that have, maybe been obstacles are going to be less so, and already we're starting to see some moves in that direction, with mesh viewers working with OpenSim as well as Second Life, and I think that's really exciting news.
Yeah, one thing, it actually seems to surprise some people that, I don't know if it's deliberate, but the new Second Life viewer 3.2 or whatever it's up to now actually works rather well with OpenSim.
Yes, I was just testing some things this afternoon actually, and it works pretty well. I mean, I keep hoping that Linden Lab will understand that when the virtual world ecosystem grows, so does Second Life. It's sort of the all boats rising philosophy instead of the there's only so much pie for everyone. And I keep hoping that they'll add things like grid managers and the things that would make using Second Life toolset more easy for OpenSim users, because I really do believe that that it's not a cannibalization, it's a growth of the metaverse at large, and Second Life benefits from that when people become interested in OpenSim. For me, it has made my time in Second Life and my efforts in Second Life more focused. They're probably losing a little money from me because I have 10 free sims on FleepGrid, but I haven't left Second Life in any way.
Exactly. I think they know that. Their strength is community, and
Yes.
And there's certain things that are just possible here that can't be done anywhere else. And if suddenly the metaverse and OpenSim is somehow takes off in a big way, then, even if Second Life is relegated to a backwater one day, it's still in its interest that it is that destination and connected to others. Anyway, we're going to take a little short break here. We need to take a station break. And before we do, in fact, I'll just say to our listeners, viewers on the web, that if you have any questions you're putting into the live stream chat or want to put any questions in there, we do have my colleague at NBC, Diz Dragonash, monitoring that, so we'll be able to take a few select questions near the end if there are any. And with that, I'll just hand it over to the station and we'll be back in just a few seconds.
I'm sexy and I know it.
Well, welcome back to part 2 of this week's CrossWorlds, where I'm joined by Fleep Tuque, educator, OpenSim pioneer, Second Life pioneer of everything, really, aren't you, Fleep?
A little bit of everything, maybe.
Yeah, I had one guest, and I had to try and read out his CV, and it just sort of said everything. Good starting point, really. Okay, I'd like to sort of move into sort of just more general thoughts, I think, actually, now. We've obviously had Chillbo and Reaction Grid. That, sadly, is going to come to a close in about a week's time, I think. Really, with Chillbo being in FleepGrid, that is now the OpenSim presence, and of course it continues in Second Life. However, the original OpenSim version, if you like, or destination for Chillbo, was on Reaction Grid. And Reaction Grid, of course, amongst other things, and you mentioned John Lester earlier, are behind the new Jibe platform, which is really taking the idea of virtual immersive spaces onto the web. And unlike Topedia and a few others, where they're actually putting OpenSim installations onto the web, Jibe is very much a sort of Unity 3D based alternative to that sort of OpenSim engine. Have you experimented with any of that at all, or any of the similar technologies, and are they of potential use, do you think?
Well, we actually, John just gave I and my team at work a nice demo of the Unity 3D Jibe platform, and I thought it was fascinating, and I'm amazed at how much work they've accomplished already with it, and I think that we're going to certainly be exploring that for some work projects. And I think what's really interesting for me, part of the pull of both Second Life and OpenSim was the ability to create collaboratively. So when we have a Chillbo Town Hall meeting, and after the meeting we all decide to decorate for Halloween or whatever, we can all do that together in real time, and I felt that was really the user-generated content in real time is a very strong pull for me for Second Life and OpenSim and platforms like that. However, when you're developing, say, a simulation for teaching medical students how to respond to a cardiac arrest scenario, they're not really going to be creating any content, and in fact, the tools to do that are a distraction in some ways. And in those cases, there are still lots of the benefits of the virtual platform, being able to walk around a model and talk about it. Those benefits are all there, even if you can't maybe modify it right there in the spot. And I think in that sense, the platforms like Unity 3D Jibe are very interesting, and frankly, the fact that it's on the web and it's so easy to get into. I mean, if you think about, at least for me, the kinds of experiences that I've created in Second Life, and to some degree in OpenSim, where content creation was not part of that experience. It was just consuming the content, enjoying the content, getting immersed in the experience, and you didn't need to be able to build to enjoy it. I think that the fact that that's so easy to do right within the web browser, there's no big downloads, there's no crazy controls, there aren't 50 million buttons on your screen, that's a very, very attractive proposition. So I think in that regard, the Reaction team is looking ahead to the kinds of experiences that a lot of content creators want to make possible with virtual worlds, and it's just so much easier in Unity. You almost can't pass it up. So, I think, but of course that has downsides too, right? It's not the connected, it's not connected in the same way as a grid like Second Life or Reaction Grid or OS Grid and those kinds of things. The content creation can't be done on the fly. Those things are, downsides, but I think it's about choosing the right virtual platform for your goal, and there are lots of applications for that I think many of us have wanted to be able to bring into Second Life, and the heavy technical requirements for the viewer and all of the UI that gets in the way of that immersive experience, especially for newcomers, has been a real hindrance in some ways.
Yeah, I think ultimately they might. The two might well come together. I mean, for example, I'm very keen on using the virtual space metaphor and thinking, right, well, I access my tools, including web pages, via the virtual space. I pull up the browser while I'm in the virtual space, as it were. There's nothing to say really that I could foresee a Unity 3D world, for example, being on a prim in Second Life, because we have media on a prim. As long as we get the plugin supported, we can mix and match the two environments according to what's actually needed at a given time. And as somebody involved with broadcasting and media, I mean, to me, lots of people watching this program, for example, will be looking at these funny little cartoons talking serious stuff and wondering what it's all about. And, TV can do some good in terms of showing people what's possible in these environments. But then the logical next step is for me to tell somebody, well, if you want to come and join us in the audience here, hit that little button. And that's not going to launch Second Life or a heavyweight viewer. It's just going to launch an instance of the audience where people can enter as a guest from the web or something. So, you can take it from the web angle and make it increasingly more immersive, or you can take it from the immersion angle and talk about incorporating it into the immersive environment itself. So I think at some point these will somehow come together, especially when I don't know, we have Sony, don't we, and we have Microsoft's Xbox, and they're all playing with like virtual environments as the first stop user space. You choose your game by walking into a parlor and deciding what game you want to play, and you pull it off the shelf virtually.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't have to be either or. It can be both, and it can be multiple applications, and depending on what it is that you're doing right that moment. And I'm hopeful that, I think that's one of the things that I enjoy most about playing with OpenSim is I feel like the open source community that's involved with that development, they're very forward-thinking people, and even if things feel a little glitchy or a little rocky now, in large part it's because we are still in such early days of all of this technology. Think about where we were 10 years ago. Just how much amazing work has been done in the last 10 years, and then think about where we're going to be in 10 or 20 more years, and it's hard to fathom. But I think the OpenSim folks are very forward-thinking, and even if they haven't solved some of these problems yet, they know what problems are on the horizon. And I think that's part of, I enjoy being part of a community that's looking towards not just the future of one specific kind of interaction. I think that they're broader minded than that and looking to grow the metaverse in an open way.
Absolutely. I have a little anecdote because we were filming over on your grid earlier, and Rob, our cameraman, he TP'd in FleepGrid, I think it was. Oh, that was smooth. Oh, that OpenSim, this is great. And then we came back into Second Life to film on Chilbo in Second Life, and it was lag hell. So can't we go back to FleepGrid? So, I mean, you say there are glitches, but increasingly there aren't that many glitches. It's usually hypergrid teleports failing in my case. But I mean, they seem to be moving along quite quickly. And of course, the most recent versions of OpenSim, which still have to come to Reaction Grid, of course, are.
I think that's happening soon, and I think people would be. I'm surprised. I work in FleepGrid for hours at a time. No, not a single crash, no lag whatsoever. Compared to trying to work in Second Life, it is like leagues apart. In fact, in terms of frame rate, especially when you're running. When you're running this on your own home network, there is no lag. There's no delay. I'm on the server. It really makes for an extremely pleasant work experience because not only do I not have the distraction of the group notices and the instant messages and what have you, the thing just works, and it works really well. So when you get into that building zone where your mind is really focused on creating, I really feel like there's no better place to do that than your private OpenSim grid. There are no distractions. The contents, it's a really smooth and pleasurable experience. And I know we're getting close to time. I just wanted to say that one of the things that I think people are worried about with OpenSim is, there's all this talk about intellectual property and that the content ecosphere doesn't exist like it exists in Second Life. And that's true to some degree. But what I found, even on FleepGrid, if I can make a quick little plug, FleepGrid.com.
Of course.
FleepGrid.com, you're welcome to create an account. But more importantly, if you're interested in exploring OpenSim, and there are a handful of other folks who are working on making content available for free, Creative Commons licensed content. So things like avatars and skins and clothes and, buildings and what have you. And I think that that's another draw for me is the Second Life community was, especially in the early years, was so giving. The Arcadias of the world and StarX and all these folks who made just unbelievable amounts of freebies that became a part of the fabric of Second Life. To be able to use a texture that someone else made and freely made available. And I have to say I love being part of that in OpenSim. When I go to another grid and see something I've made being used there, it gives me that warm fuzzy feeling like I'm contributing to something meaningful. And I think that that's one of the great things about OpenSim right now is there's lots of need. If you're a great animator, if you're a great builder, people who are trying to learn the technology and trying to share OpenSim with other people, they're so appreciative. And at least for me, that's greater than any monetary reward, honestly. To have that sense that I've something I did help somebody else, it feels good. So, I think if you're interested in that kind of thing, you're welcome to go to FleepGrid, pick up whatever you want, share it with whoever you like, and there are lots of other OpenSim creators who are doing similar things. So don't be afraid, I think, to try.
I was going to say, actually, before we wrap up, the other thing you have actually got is that there is a very specific FleepGrid shop, isn't there? Although I don't know you really buy anything there. It's sort of a collection of mostly free things, am I right? That people can use to stock and sell. So.
Yep, it's all free. So most of what I create, if you don't have console access, so if you have an account on somebody else's grid, you can hypergrid to FleepGrid and pick up the actual box like you would in Second Life. You just take a copy and then you can take it home. But if you're running your own OpenSim or if you have console access on your grid, OpenSim has what's called OR and OAR and IAR files. So that's the OpenSim archive, which is a whole region. So you just take a snapshot of the island and you can save that file and then upload it to another grid. Or the IARs, the inventory archives. So I can go to my inventory and say back up a whole folder and export that as a file. And that's the FleepGrid web shop allows you to download those OR or IAR files, and then you can import that right into your system. So and everything there is free. And there are other places, out there that are also selling content, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. Whatever floats your boat. But I think people were afraid, like, I don't want to have to go out there and start from scratch with no inventory, no nothing. Maybe I can build a building, but I can't make skins. I think there's enough content out there in the OpenSim ecosystem that you don't have to feel like you're naked and have nothing.
Talking of which, I have to say a compliment for you here. When I encountered your avatar, I mean, I'm used to your avatar all over the place, but when I encountered your avatar on FleepGrid, I could barely tell the difference between the avatar on Second Life here and the one in FleepGrid. You've got that uniformity of presence right across the grids, which is wonderful. I can see you coming a mile off, so to speak.
Well, I think that's one of the things, at least for me, lots of people like to play with identity, but I'm Fleep everywhere. I was never much into the role-playing, and so, being recognizable is a good thing, and I feel, when I'm not in my avatar, I just feel uncomfortable. It's not me. So, and that's been great about OpenSim and the hypergrid is that I can be myself. I can be my little Fleep with her hair and her glasses wherever I go.
Wonderful. Well, I wish we had a lot more time because time always flies on these programs. You don't realize it, and it's about time we need to wrap up. So, I always we got about 2 minutes for you. So, I always like to end the program, as it were, by literally asking guests their fears or hopes, or both, for the future, and in the near or far future, as you see it. Really, if that's not too tough a question.
Well, it's a pretty tough question, but I think I think we've seen in the last few years that I don't remember who said it, but I thought it was a great analogy that mobile and tablets have sort of sucked the air out of everything else in the technology world, and in that sense, virtual worlds sort of fell off the hype map, and while in some ways that's been a bad thing, in other ways I feel like it's a good thing, because it gives those of us who are really, who can envision the future that we want to see, time to work. Yeah. To work without the media and all the constant news stories that completely misappropriate what we're doing. It gives us a chance to really focus on the metaverse that we want to have in the future and work out some of those kinks. I think some of the biggest problems aren't even the technical ones, they're the social ones. Things like IP and governance and how we're going to work out differences between grids and things like that. So for me, OpenSim is that way forward. As much as I love Second Life and support Linden Lab's work in creating newer, better tools, for me, the OpenSim community sort of embodies that forward-thinking, do-it-yourself. And that's what made the web happen. Apache is the web server of the world, and I really do think that OpenSim has the best chance to be the metaverse server of the world. So I'd encourage folks to try it, and don't be afraid. You don't have to be a super geek even to run your own, and I'll be happy to help if you have questions even. So I think that wraps it up for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. So great. Brave New Metaverse, is the new frontier, really. Okay, well, thanks very much, Fleep, for being here. It's been wonderful having you. I hope I'll get you back at some point, and there seems to be endless things we can continue talking about, including putting the Metaverse on those tablets. However, that's it, I'm afraid, folks, for this week's show. We will be back in 2 weeks. And in the spirit of cross-programming cultivation here, if you're watching this at metaversetv.com live, or care to, on Monday, we have a brand new program called Metaverse Live. It airs at 4 p.m. Second Life time. It's live every Monday. I'm on it, and I'm joined by Dusa Dragonash and Sigmund Leominster and various guests, where we sort of look at all things topical, or many things topical. So do join us then, and I'll be back here with another CrossWorlds in 2 weeks' time. Meanwhile, for those of you in the States, this time next week, I can wish you a happy Thanksgiving, I believe. So with that, I'll sign out. My thanks again to Fleep Tuque, and it's bye for now.